Morning all, and welcome to this week's Jump Advisory discussion. Firstly, apologies for last week's slight technical issues. I've gone back through the video and I suddenly realized that the slides weren't moving on. Not because we weren't moving the slides on, it's because I couldn't move the slides on. But Heather and I dealt manfully or personally or womanly, whatever it is nowadays. I'm not too sure sometimes on that sort of front, but we dealt with it from there. So this week, what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about sort of things about learning from the past. So is your business fit for purpose for today? But what's it going to be like in the next 12 months and beyond? We know that traditionally, the economic cycle is about 7 years. So it goes from recession to boom and back to recession in around about 7 years. And the last true recession was 2008. So we can start to think that, we're a little bit out of sync, and then the pandemic hit, etc. So we're completely out of sync with the actual economic cycle. But during the pandemic, there were lots of predictions from various sources, including the unemployment rate rising to its 1992 level of above 10%, when in fact it only got to 7%. It was predicted that analysts were saying it was a bathtub recession where it would fall sharply, if I could say the words, very little bottom out, and then rise quickly, which is exactly what we've seen from there. So we've seen how that has worked. They said it'd be a similar recession to the 1918-1919 recession, where the market crashed and then recovered quickly, which you've also seen. But there was a difference between the two sessions. In 2008, it was an economic recession, where in 1919 and 1918, it was a global pandemic recession, Spanish flu. So very similar to what we have today. So while at the moment we're making hay while the sun shines, we've got to look for the future, but also learn from the past. It took 4 years from 2008 to 2012 for the economic cycle to recover to where they were pre-crash in 2008, when in 1918-1919, the recession came back, and within 1920, it was back to where it was. However, in 1920 onwards, America hit the Great Depression, which was a knock-on effect from the First World War and the Spanish flu. So what can we learn? The window of opportunity, we keep saying, is widely open at the moment. And we know, well, we don't actually know how long it's actually going to last. Some people are saying it's going to last for a long time. Some people are saying it's not going to last. But what we're going to say is that the world is more stable now and more healthier now than it was in the 1920s. So, however, whilst we focus on today, the urgency of filling jobs, do we need to keep an eye on the future? Because the economic cycle, now out of sync, is now going to change again, because we start to think about what's coming in. So could we change the health and the First World War to global issues, climate change, fuel prices, etc., that could put a huge strain on the world's sort of financial function, similar to what happened in the 1920s. So if we look at the stats of global warming, and I tell you, I looked at lots of stats on the global warming, and what I found was over the next 5 years, there are so many stats. Some you would say are believed, some you don't believe. So I haven't actually pulled the stat, but what it says is that somewhere in the middle of all those stats is the truth. And that's what we've got to start to think about. So whilst today, we are absolutely looking at what's going forward, and we can look at the stats that are happening now. Unemployment is at 4.8, and that was predicted back in Q2 of the recession or the pandemic. It said it would not fall in Q4 2020, it would be back below 5%, and it's at 4.8 now. Job postings at the highest they've ever been at 10.4 million. Wages have gone up 18% in the last 12 months. So we can see the trends are growing and growing. However, they're not going to remain like that forever. And what we've got to start to think about, what did we learn from the 2008 recession? What can we learn from other recessions, so we can start to plan our business for the future? Because trends will change, and what we want to make sure is that we're not left behind as an agency. So today I'm joined by Heather and by Paul Sharp. Mr. Jacobs and Mr. Pye are, I believe, down in Bristol somewhere, sunning themselves, or as they said last night, they are getting washed away because it was absolutely torrential rain down there. So we're going to kick off. So let's throw the first question out. If you were leading a sales team now, what would be your strategy that you would implement to challenge your competitors in 2022?
Howard, I'll jump in. You mentioned the 1920s. I'm so glad that Paul Jacobs isn't on the call, because otherwise he'd be telling us everything that went on in the 1920s. Anyway, we'll skip on from that one. I think for me the starting point is got to be, so the client needs are going to change. And Howard, you and I and Heather, we were all at the Rec Expo down in Birmingham a few weeks ago. It was really interesting listening to the other speakers. Adam Pohl from the Staffing Industry Analyst was on just before us, as was Anne Swain. I listened to a number of the speakers on the day before. And when we got up and spoke, we gave a very consistent message, which was now is absolutely the time to start to think about the services and products that we're offering our clients. We're much in a traditional sort of recruitment model now. Everybody's predicting that it will be about solving problems in 2022 and not just providing recruitment service or a recruitment service. So I think, we talk about this a lot, don't we, about really segmenting your client base, understanding what your plan is to get from A to B, how you become much more consultative, how you solve problems, how you create recurring revenue by solving problems. And by solving problems and getting recurring revenue, you will become an awful lot more sticky with your client. The one thing that a lot of agencies have really taken the foot off the gas with is service reviews. Understand why? Sometimes it's hard to get in front of clients because they're not all back in the office, and we're heads down trying to sort of find candidates and place people. But now is really a great time to start to think about, when was the last time I had a service review with my most important client? What am I giving them? What am I presenting? What am I sharing? And how do I elevate myself to have more senior relationships in that organization and be perceived as somebody that actually solves problems and is consultative? So if I were leading a sales team today, that's where my focus would go.
Interested to hear from your thoughts on that, Heather, because obviously you're from the HR side rather than from leading sort of sales teams. If you're looking at what you would be planning or what you think from a HR perspective, what you would need to implement to help the business survive 2022 and then beyond, what things would you be looking to push in?
Thanks, Howard. I think that for me, I loved listening to your kind of history stuff at the beginning, and it's really interesting to look at, what happened post the First World War and what happened in 2008 and what's happening now, and to compare. But what I think we've learned from all of those things is it's really hard to predict what's going on, and the only certainty is uncertainty. And so for me, from an HR point of view, from a people point of view, what I'd be looking to do is future-proof our teams by making sure our leaders and our managers understand how to deal with uncertainty and how to deal with change. Because the amount of change that our organisations and our people have had to deal with over the last couple of years is frankly astonishing, and I think there's more to come. I think there is. We don't quite know which way the economy is going. We don't quite know what's happening with climate change. We don't quite know what's happening with China and how that's going to impact the economy worldwide. And we need to prep our leaders and our managers to deal with uncertainty, to be able to make decisions quickly and implement them, to be able to take their teams with them. So keeping an eye on the marketplace and the change, and listening, and coming on webinars like this and seeing where, going to the expo and listening to people say, where's the market going, but then being ready for change. So that's what I would be doing to future-proof my team from a people point of view, is have them really understand, how do you manage change in an organisation?
It's interesting, as we plan these sort of sessions, we never actually talk to each other. We just fire out the questions of what we're going to talk about, etc. This is what I love about hosting this, that I get to this point and I'm going, right, okay, I'm going to say this, I'm going to say this, I'm going to say this, and then you two all steal everything that I'm going to say, and I go, okay, I've got to sort of think of something now what to say. But what I will say is that if we sort of went back to 2008 and we start to look what we did in 2008, one thing we started to look at was the clients had fared well in recession, and we looked at clients that hadn't fared well in recession. and we started to actually put a business development strategy in to actually work on that. Now, no one predicted the 2008 recession was as big as it was, but the last recession from an IT point of view was 2001 and 2002. So we knew there was a recession coming or somewhere around the corner. So we started to plan for it then, even though it wasn't actually being talked about at the time. And we started to change our business development strategy. We started to change the type of clients that we were looking at and type of clients that we were going into, because we wanted to create more. And what your comment there about, the only constant is change, and that's what we started to look at. And I was a big driver of, we can't say we've always done it that way and therefore it must stay that way. We had to change things. If I start to then go back just before the pandemic, about probably a year before the pandemic, I remember being up in Scotland talking to the Scottish market about video technology, and was almost laughed out of the room about, that's never going to happen. Candidates are never going to take that. Clients certainly won't take that. When we look at where we are now. So I think what we've got to start to look at is a change of our client base. What are clients looking like? How are they going to survive a potential recession? Because they'll be having the same conversations and the same sort of thought process. But also we've got to think about what can we implement into our business that will help recession our business, help our recruitment becomes quicker, faster, smoother. And Paul said that, we were down at the expo a couple of weeks ago, there was lots of new technology coming into the marketplace that can enable you to do that, to take out the manual function of recruitment, which means that you can speed things up. And so we have to start to change to give our clients a better service. And so to me, we think about what's going on. Now, as we talk about clients, I'm going to bracket clients, I'm going to bracket candidates together, because what we've discovered through lockdown is that we chase clients constantly. It's job, 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 job. How many jobs have we got and how many jobs have we created, etc. What we think we've got to understand is that our candidate generates us the money. Our clients just merely pay the bill. And so if we start to think about developing a true candidate pool as well at the same time and really understand our candidate market, now we can start to challenge. So it was interesting I think it was the first part of when LinkedIn came live. And I put a post on LinkedIn saying, there's no such thing as recession for recruiters, only recruiters who can't find clients who are buying at this moment in time. And I got a hurl of abuse from the typical recruiter going, oh, this is happening in my market, this is happening in my market, etc. And then all of a sudden, from around the world, I got loads of recruiters. So, well, I'm working in that market and I'm having an absolute boom time. I'm working in that market and I'm absolutely excelling my targets, etc. So where there is crisis and where there are issues and where there is recession, there is opportunity if you take the time to go and look for it. And that's what I would start now. I'd start looking for those opportunities now and looking for those clients now. So that sort of leads us into a next question, because obviously one of the things that we've found sort of recently is that manpower is the most important thing on every company's agenda. So how do we find consultants who can deliver 360 recruitment? We're finding that almost impossible at the moment to actually attract those people. So what would your recruitment strategy be in 2022 to bring people into the business or to change the people who are already working in the business?
First and foremost, when you say manpower, we don't mean manpower the agency. Clearly, we mean our own individual people.
People power.
People power. Well, we regurgitating some of the stats that have been around for the last sort of 2 or 3 months, but there is one which I think is really prevalent, which is there's more recruiter jobs advertised now around the globe than ever before. It is the #1 most common advertised role on LinkedIn, above anything in the IT space, which is unique. And I think, we talked about this great resignation, which has been, bumbling around for the last 2 or 3 months. I'm going to flip this on the head. And I think this is actually, for the next few months, it's about the great retention. So I think for me, I think part of the starting point is, how do we retain people? How do we retain the people that we've got? What do we need to do? When was the last time we reviewed salaries? When was the last time we reviewed development plans? When was the last time we looked at the career map? Does everybody know what the org chart is going to look like in 3 years' time? and how they may fit in that in 3 years' time. And then the question is, how do we get them from A to B? So I think there's initially a massive piece about how do we retain people, and that should be on the first and foremost of everybody's mind here and now. The second part for me, Howard, you've just talked about it there, which is about how do we find. I think for me, it's about segmenting work, and we've again, it's a common theme here. But finding your 360-degree recruiters is really challenging and really hard. If you segment the work and start to train people so that they can do the next bit of work in the process, what you end up with is the delivery bit. And that delivery part of the work is actually the bit that you can find people to do. And if you can't find people, you can find technology. And if you can't find technology, as we know, you can find outsourced providers that will do that grunt work for you in terms of sourcing and doing the long listing of candidates. So I think look at that retention bit, make sure you've got a really clear plan about retaining your people and you understand the how and the why and the what, and then break the work down and look at how you can push people through the funnel and how you can either outsource or use technology to do some of the stuff that is repeat work and labor heavy.
Paul, you've taken the words right out of my mouth. I think that
took the words right out of my mouth. Meatloaf. I love that.
Hey!
Don't mention it. I'll get a fine from YouTube of copyright.
No, sorry.
Oh, do you mean I can't sing? I was gonna burst into song there.
Move on.
Paul, words right out of my mouth. I absolutely forget sometimes that retention is just as important. There's no point in turning the tap on if we haven't put the plug in the sink, right? So we absolutely have to be looking at how do we retain the people we've got? How do we train them so they're the most productive they can be and they're the happiest they can be? And they're, how do we anticipate what it is that the Rec to Recs, for example, are going to be saying to our consultants? Because if we think that successful consultants aren't getting daily, probably, if not weekly, phone calls from Rec to Recs, if we think that people are just staying because they're loyal to us without us actively doing something to keep that going, we're wrong. So we really have got to focus, and it's hard when we're busy in the busiest market we've ever been in to take time out and think about what am I doing with my own staff? What am I doing with my existing staff? And I spoke to, actually, he's a young lad, he's a friend of the son of a friend of mine who's just taken an offer to go and work for a competitor, and they've given him a massive pay rise. And I said, what was it that made you kind of look for the job? And he said, well, I had to look out there and I realised that actually base salaries have moved on. And he spoke to his boss and he resigned, and he's never met her. He's been working remotely for 2 years and he's never met his boss. And his boss is saying, oh yeah, I had to look when you resigned, and you're right, salaries have moved on. And he, how come for 2 years she's not taken the trouble to go and meet with him and talk to him? He's so important and so valuable, which it turns out it is, because there's all kind of counter offers going now. What's she been doing for the last 2 years in terms of talking to him and retaining him and addressing the salary? Why wait till the guy resigns to get into a bidding war, which they're now in? It's just what a wasted opportunity, because actually he loved his job and he just stayed, but he's not going to now. So what are we doing proactively to keep the people in our businesses, to keep them happy, to keep them trained, to keep them productive, to think about the role that they do? And that then leads on to exactly what Paul is saying, which is, if we can't find people to do the bits of the job that we haven't got people to do, if we restructure and reorganize, absolutely outsourcing is the key. I've had personal success in organizations with outsourcing. It's a really powerful tool to add to your armory, and it's utterly scalable. So it sits perfectly with that change agenda, because you can scale up, scale down as the economy scales up, scales down. It's a no-brainer.
So I think we're hitting the right number and we're hitting the right call. It's about retention rather than attraction, because it's easier to retain than it is to attract at this moment. So it's what do we do to attract and retain, and that retention is really the thing. I think the other side is then, as what Paul was alluding to, is putting people into where their strengths absolutely dominate, so they get more job satisfaction, and therefore retention becomes easier. And so therefore, is there an opportunity to change the function? I was with a client yesterday who is probably one of the biggest 360 advocates in the world, and then all of a sudden they're now putting in a delivery function, and they're putting a delivery function in to free their 360 people up so they can sell to more clients and open more clients. But also they said, we want to remove some of the clients that are being a little bit of a pain to us. And the other side was when we started to talk about the 360 function the delivery function to the 360 guys, they suddenly realized how much a big part they need to play in the development of those 360 the delivery people, and how we should compartmentalize their job down into small little fragments and train them over a long period of time to absolutely dominate those fragments. And I think the call was, if you think you are good at resourcing and good at that delivery function, train those people to be better than you are, and then you can move on and do more sales. And so I think there's a big thing on that retention front, and a big thing about putting people into the right place. So if we look at that, we know it's a candidate-driven market at the moment. So what would you change about your client strategy in 2022?
Well, I think for me, you've touched on it a little bit, Howard, which is looking at the relationship with your clients, understanding where it's at on the client life cycle, understanding what type of business you do with those clients, and whether, so I've got 3 bits of criteria, but I know you sometimes use more, Howard. Have we got really good rates? Are they north of 18%? Have we got exclusivity? And are the roles in our swim lane? So this is now the time for me to really look at the clients that we've been working with over the past 2 or 3 years. This should include your lapsed clients as well, and starting to work out whether these clients are where you want to spend your time. Once you start to categorize the work and opportunities that you've got coming through for your clients, then for me, 80% of everybody's time should be spent on those clients that tick all 3 boxes. So that may mean that some clients that only tick 1 or 2 get some of the time, or they get a more transactional service. So this is about spending more time on the clients that fit those 3 bits of criteria, and they become your priority A roles, and that's where the time should be spent. I just want to caveat one thing. I spoke to 5 global heads of talent acquisition last week, and they're all saying the same thing, which is they're very aware that agencies are starting to walk away from clients. So how you walk away from client will be remembered. And some of those heads of talent acquisition were telling stories about conversations that have gone on with agencies. So it's just making sure you do it in the right way. You use data to back up your story and your reasons, and you're very compassionate and authentic about your reasons for walking away. And make it so that the client really wants you to come back, not that they, the door's shut and that's it. They put in the bolt on and everything else.
I think it's an interesting sort of view, because again, this was a big question in yesterday in the client meeting that I was with yesterday all day, was we need to understand our clients more. Full stop. We do not understand our clients enough. And it was really interesting when I started to go through the process that I said, well, how do we change our process of talking to our clients? And I went through a process and talked about it, and he said, that just sounds like RPO. We don't do RPO. And I said, I know, but how many clients have you lost to RPO over the last 2 or 3 years? And he went, oh yeah, I've lost quite a few clients to an RPO over the last 2 or 3 years. So I said, they're not just clients, they're potentially your biggest clients. He said, yes. Every year I've lost one of my biggest clients to an RPO in the last 3 years. So it sort of says, when we start to think about what the RPOs are asking, they want to know everything about what that recruitment function is going to be doing and the headcount growth over the next 12, 18, 24 months. We want to know what the headcount is doing tomorrow. And that is the standard, contingent recruiter. We're just looking at today and tomorrow, and whether can we have a job today. We don't look at the long-term future. So I think if we're going to change anything about our client strategy, it's to get to fully understand what our clients needs, so we can then, and this went back into where the delivery function came from. So you said, so what we can be doing is pre-populating our candidates, our database with candidates prior to when our clients need them. So rather than ringing up today, today's the 20th of October, and they say we want someone on the 1st of November, we'll know that back in June and July, and we'll already building a candidate base that can handle that. So I think the biggest change has to be to be more in bed with our clients and be seen to understand what our clients' problems are. And that's what you were talking about there, solving those problems, and then look at how you can do that. You can't solve a client's problems who he says, right, I want this now, this is my problem now, and you must solve it tomorrow, because the chance of solving it is very remote. We need to have a longer period of time and be more trusted by our clients to understand that, so we can actually go out and deliver that properly.
And I'll just add one thing, Howard. For me, RPO is not about filling jobs. It's not about headcount. It's about everything from workforce planning through to leavers and offboarding and everything in between. And that takes a different type of conversation to have with clients.
And I think the comment that's up on the screen at the moment was the bit that really sort of, when I was going through this morning looking for quotes, to change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. And that is what RPO did, to change the way they would deal with with clients, and basically usurp recruiters out of those businesses. And that is what we need to be doing to safeguard our businesses from those bigger players. So that leads on to the next question. You want to sort of jump into there, Heather?
No, nothing to add to that.
Okay. So when we start to look at that, we know there are peaks, and at the moment we're massively heading towards a peak. We know where there's a peak, there's obviously a trough. So what is the one thing that you'd implement in the next 12 months to help recession-proof your business?
Oh, that's a big question.
I do like a big question.
What would you do to recession-proof your business in the next 12 months? I would look at outsourcing. I would scale my business to cope with the current surge in job and opportunities using outsourcing, so that I can descale when and if the recession comes. That's all I do.
I think for me, I have a slightly different view. I think I would train everybody to the point they're saying, please, Paul, no more training. I think training is going to be really, really important. We talked about having, these high level conversations. We're talking about sticky revenue, or Simon is. We're talking about, service reviews. We're talking about being much more consultative. We're talking about, possibly building niche and boutique, solutions, whether it be RPO and MSP or talent advisory. All that comes with training and support and advice. And if you're not focused on that, it's just a wish list, thinking that you can turn up to a client and sell those services. So for me, I would be really heavily focused in on staff training and development, and link it back to that 3-year-old chart, so people can see the journey going on. They can see what their purpose is in the organization. So this is very much about their why, and it gives them a why, and it gives them an absolute, really cohesive career map in terms of what they're going to possibly do, or the opportunities they're going to have over the next 2 or 3 months. So I all for me, Howard, back to training. And if you think about what happened over the last 12 months, the one thing we stopped spending money on in most cases was training. The agencies that were really fast out the starting blocks were some of the agencies that actually invested really heavy in training in the quiet months. And that for me would be a really key learning point.
And interestingly, I wonder if there's an opportunity as well to not train, but educate our clients too about different ways of working with recruitment businesses. And one of the things that busy businesses have dropped is that running events for clients, building relationships, sharing data, educating about different ways of recruiting about different ways of working with partners and different service offers. So I actually think maybe there's something linked to that, Paul, because if your team aren't trained, they can't then deliver those education services to their clients.
It was quite interesting, wasn't it, when lockdown came, and in that March, and obviously at that stage we were different organisations. One of the things that we rolled out at Love Work Life through Paul Jacobs and I, we rolled out a weekly training session, and we were getting hundreds of recruiters on those training sessions, free of charge, etc. Hundreds of recruiters. And what was interesting was getting the feedback. And it wasn't the feedback from junior recruiters, it was the feedback from people with 10 years plus saying, oh my God, I hadn't thought about that. Or you've just reminded me, oh, absolutely, that's helped me with this, that's helped me with that. And so I think people have started to understand where before you put seasoned recruiters on a training session that they think is basic, actually they can learn an awful lot. And I think a lot of seasoned recruiters suddenly understood that how much they'd forgotten and how much they'd lost. But the one thing I think that really shone out during that period, and what I would look to do in the next 12 months to help recession-proof that business, is we started to actually listen to the analysts. We started to listen of what was actually happening, and we started to look at what they were predicting. And to be fair, what they started to predict back at the start of that recession and the pandemic has actually come true. Yes, I'm not talking about the numbers of deaths, etc., which is appalling, but what was actually happening from a business point of view has absolutely come to fruition. And I think that's what we've got to start to think about. So if I was thinking about what I would be looking at, if the trough starts, is what are the analysts saying? What are they saying is going to happen? And that means I can make an informed decision rather than just a speculative decision on what I'm doing with my business. How many people, and I could name companies, but I'm not going to, in that first 3 or 4 weeks of lockdown, suddenly canned all their staff. And then all of a sudden, the government said, this is what we're going to do. They brought furlough in, and then they brought other things. But the analysts were saying, how quickly were we going to come out of recession, and said what was actually happening. It's interesting when you go back and look at those clients now, they are the ones that are absolutely screaming for staff and absolutely panicking that they haven't got staff. They've lost clients, but they lost face because they didn't sort of understand what was happening, and they took a knee-jerk reaction rather than listening to what people were saying. And I don't talk about listening to us, I'm talking about listening to the true city analysts, what they're saying about the market and what's going on. So to me, that's the sort of thing I'd look at from a management point of view to recession-proof my business. Yes, we need to train the hell out of people, but I would start to look at what people are saying about the business, about the economic cycle and what's going to happen in that, because they are pretty accurate in what they're predicting, and I think that will help lots and lots of businesses. So
I've just got one really quick point, Howard, just to share.
Yeah, go on.
I think sometimes as business leaders, we read the data, but we don't absorb it. And I think sometimes it sort of loosely stays in our head, but we don't act upon it. The one thing that will absolutely happen over the next 2 or 3 years is that the contingent worker will play a bigger part in organizations than what it has in the past. So if you're not offering temp or contingent services, if you're not offering anything around interim workers, now is the time to build that into your business plan, because that is a trend. This is one of those moments in the 1980s when those little round disc things came out, and I said they'd never replace vinyl. And all these wires and these flashing screens came out in the early 1990s, and I said the internet never took off for the common person. This is one of those moments that if you ignore it, you do so at your peril.
And I think that to sort of add to that, Paul, it's not sometimes they read the information, they read the stats, they read what's going on. It's they don't understand what it actually means, and they don't go out and then find somebody who can actually say, well, this is what that means, this is what's going to happen, this is where it's going to go, and I don't truly analyze it deep enough to really reckon that. So if we go back then to 2008, the last big recession, what tips can you give to people that helped your business or your team survive and prosper during that period?
So I think for me, it's predicting it's using the data a little bit. So we probably maybe covered some of this question, I think, Howard. I think it's using the data and what the analysts and people like Deloitte, McKinsey, staffing industry analysts are saying in terms of predicting what will rise and what will happen. So I think for me, it is around that contingent space, and I think it is more around solutions. I think that's where clients are going to have a bigger need going forward. So I think, you know, what the worst thing you can do at post-recession is stay static in what you've. So, you know, being agile and looking beyond the future, I think is really key. And I've got a point about business planning, but I'll hold that back for the last question because I think it sort of plays into it.
Yeah, I think you're right about change and being agile. So it takes me back to a point right at the very beginning. You know, making sure that your leadership team and your managers are able to implement change, that they understand change and how they can impact it. Because when the market changes, you need to be ready to change. So I would do a lot of work on that, and that certainly helped back in 2008, which was interesting times. And the other thing is really obvious and not really linked to what we're talking about, which is cash flow. Really understand your cash flow position and really pressure test it. So, you know, if this happens, what happens to my cash flow? If that happens, what happens to my cash flow? And what am I going to do about it? So, you know, you're not dealing with that live for the first time, but you've actually done some kind of pressure testing around the numbers.
I think this is where leadership really stands up. You know, we always say in a crisis, this is where leaders really show their true worth and their true mettle. And I think the thing that I gleaned the biggest out of 2008 was not to talk about recession. It was almost a fight club. You know, what's the first rule of recession? Don't talk about recession. What's the second rule of recession? Don't talk about recession. Because if you start to talk about recession, guess what? Everyone starts to think about recession and starts to look to make up excuses because there is a recession that's actually happening. And I think wherever you are in the marketplace, there is opportunities when the market goes into recession, and it's our job to find those opportunities. So we've talked quite heavily about building the skill set of our people. What we haven't talked heavily about is improving our service to our clients. Because one thing I noticed after 2008 was the mindset of people changed hugely. And it started the big change in DE&i. It started the big change in people welfare. And if we think what lockdown has done, that has accelerated that and brought that right to the agenda of every single person. So it's all about the people. So we think about how we deliver a service to our consultants, whether that be training, development, career advice, etc. Think about the services we provide to our candidates. Think about the service that we provide to our clients. If we can start to change those and develop those so we become more leaner, we become better, then what we start to find is clients will stay with us. In Simon's words, sticky. They'll become more sticky. You know, candidates will gravitate towards us, because what will happen is it will become a client market and not a candidate market. So we've got to start to think at this process, how do we cope with that? So to me, the big change is all about mindset, and it's all about not believing that a recession is going to fault your business. Look for the opportunities, because in every recession, there are huge opportunities. And that leads us to the last question. I think it's quite an interesting last question. What will stop business owners implementing the things that we've talked about?
You want to go first, Paul?
One thing, Howard, for me, business owners.
Shh, they're on the. Shh, they're listening, Paul. Shh, they're listening.
Oh, you didn't tell me that. They will be the one thing that stops them being successful next year. So for me, you know, I've booked in the last 10 days, I've booked in 5 business planning sessions for 2022. Now is the time to get your business plan sorted out and have a really clear idea of how you're getting from A to B for next year. I've just posted in the chat facility a link that I pushed out on LinkedIn on Monday, just asking people what they are anticipating going for in terms of growth for next year. understanding how the market is performing, making sure you're pitching yourself right and not pitching yourself under what the market's going to grow at is really important. I think looking at where your priorities are, your services, your service lines, having a really clear marketing plan, understanding your people plan, having a really clear understanding of what the key business metrics are in terms of how you measure performance. So now, between now and Christmas, this is the key time to get your business plan sorted out. And the last bit I'd just add is it's the key time to get it sorted out and present it to your teams so that they know what they're coming back into in the new year. So this is part of the retention strategy. Make sure you've got a really good plan, share that plan with your people, have a really good Q1 incentive plan, which you can announce at the same time that you're sharing your business plan, and start to get people excited for coming back in the new year. That will start, things like that will help people stay focused on coming back and not going somewhere else. You've got to have a plan. The amount of people that have got the plan up there and it's not written down and it's not communicated, it's got to happen now more than ever before.
Yeah.
Well, before you jump in there, Heather, I'll just put one thing on the top of that plan, okay? Because we deal with lots of companies, Paul, as well, you know, and we develop lots of plans. And how often do they come off plan because they get, follow a shiny object or whatever it be, and never come back onto the plan? So if you're going to make a plan and invest in a plan, then it's not something that should be gathering dust. It should be something that's actioned constantly to help drive the business. Sorry, Heather.
100%.
Well, then really, it's about exactly what you're saying. I think that recruitment leaders in successful businesses are so focused at the moment on making hay while the sun shines. They are so excited by the boom time that we're in, and rightly so. We want to maximize this amazing opportunity, but really taking time out every week to do something about the things that Paul and Howard have been talking about. Just understanding that just making hay while the sun shines isn't going to be sustainable in the long run. And you've got to manage your time so that we talk about Stephen Covey's quadrants to do with urgent and important. You've got to be spending time as a business leader in the planning bit about all of the things that Paul and Howard have spoken about. And if you're not doing that, you are not future-proofing your business.
There's two examples there, Heather, for me. Back in March, I was working with somebody in the hospitality sector, and it was all about getting back in front of candidates and building that candidate comms back up. This is when a lot of people were still on furlough in that industry, so it was getting on the front foot, again, part of the plan. And another client of mine, we were talking about hiring and building out the UVP when people weren't even thinking about hiring at that moment in time. So it's about using the plan and getting ahead of the curve and being somebody who other agencies are following and not a laggard in the industry. You've got to get on the front foot.
I think it's been, I look at this in a very simple way. Making hay while the sun shines is always a comment that sort of stands out to me when people talk about that. I come from my family's history is back into butchery and farming, but actually wholesale butchery. So I've spent a lot of time on farms as kids and stuff like that. And yes, they make hay while the sun shines, but they are planning for the winter because they are planting and cropping and et cetera, through the winter to make sure the next summer, there is hay whilst the sun is shining. And so they plan massively and meticulously to the farmers what they're doing throughout the year. They don't just think, oh, it's going to grow and I'll crop it and I'll be happy days. They actually plan for the next crop, the next crop, the next crop, the next crop. So they go through almost that boom and bust cycle where, they grow the crop and then they crop, they harvest it, etc. Then they have a fallow period where they've got to grow again, but they've got to make sure they've got enough cash to get through that process, and therefore they've got to look at how they can do that. So you're right in what you're saying, Paul, that these business owners are the people that generally stop because they focus too much on the now and not what's coming down the line and what's on the little future. And I think people think that it's a lack of time. I think it's a lack of planning and a lack of process that is going to stop people implementing that. But it's also sometimes a lack of knowledge, because a lot of people only know what they know. And I will always say that I only know what I know, and what I know is a very little bit. What I think I know is a little bit more, and what I don't know is absolutely huge. And so I spend all my time reading and developing to find out little bits that I don't know to help develop that. And so business owners is about them implementing, it's about them driving. So I think what we're saying today then is, as we close today's webinar off, is that, it's all about the people. If we train and develop the people, if we look after our people, guess what? They'll look after our clients and they'll look after our candidates. If we understand what our clients and candidates want, then we can start to develop that. If we follow the trends and look at the trends, then we can see where we can potentially act diligently and quickly rather than making knee-jerk reactions, which might be, not particularly great for your business, etc. So next week, we have another webinar sort of following on this topic again. So we want to please join us next week. It's been an interesting day today. Heather, you need to go back upstairs next week because your Wi-Fi was a little bit weak this week from there. I know you love your new coffee table. Ladies and gentlemen, she's in a sort of looking at a new coffee table, which is why she's downstairs. Paul, thanks so much.
All right, I'll go back to the office.
It's much appreciated. Ladies and gents, thanks so much for your time. If you have any questions, please email them to them. If not, we will see you all next week. Thanks very much.
Bye.